Bittersweet, Brooklyn. Today we broadcast from between northernmost Williamsburg and southernmost Greenpoint, across from the skate park of the McCarran Park Pool. I'm Meredith Chesney and my co-host is Dennis Sind. We are joined by Danny Robo of Ridgewood, Queens. Today is our second episode. What better way to discuss the bitter and sweet of Brooklyn than to talk about Domino Sugar in the Southside of Williamsburg. Neighbors Esteban Duran and Brian Paul join us to discuss recent shadows cast by the waterfront property over Southside Williamsburg, extending over Brooklyn and beyond into future construction and development in New York City, among other things.
Thank you, Meredith. Good day, neighbors. I'm Dennis Sin. Before we proceed with this episode on Domino Sugar, let's discuss a brief email sent to me by Henry Stewart, editor of Brooklyn Magazine and on the staff of Elle Magazine. Last episode, our inaugural episode, focused on the closing of McCarran Park Pool in 1984, its recent reopening in 2012, with a summary in between. We also spoke about media coverage, representation, and characterization of the pool's most recent history. Let's emphasize that Stewart did not represent or identify himself in any seeming official capacity. He never writes, quote, I'm editor of so-and-so or writer of so-and-so, end quote. We received his note from not from his Elle Magazine or Brooklyn Magazine email account, but from Northside Media. The status or association between these entities is uncertain, so it's best to say this is no official statement by any of those publications and or websites, but merely a personal observation from a professional in an emergent field, New Brooklyn Media. Stewart writes, it's true that we reported on some of the violence and crime that happened early on when the pool reopened, but we also published this. And he provides a link that we're going to put on our Facebook page. And other posts acknowledging that the press was being a bit overwrought in its coverage and that pool was mostly a success for the people actually using it, end quote. I quickly acknowledged his email, Stewart's email, and explored the link he provided. I came across a curious editorial insertion in the second paragraph of the article that read, the article's name is Portraits of the Real McCarran Park Pool, that read, quote, editor's note, yes, we've mainly reported the bad news, end quote. Half in jest, I wrote back to Stewart and pointed this out to him, and he in turn responded, quote, I think it's fair to say that at first we were swept up in the narrative, lots of other people were, but then we took a step back and tried to compensate for that. I don't know if his parents named him for that reason, but his first name is Esteban, for Esteban de Jesus, and his last name is Duran, for Roberto Duran. And the trilogy between Roberto Duran and Esteban de Jesus is the best boxing trilogy ever. Every single time I say his name, I'm reminded of the trilogy.
Yeah, it rolls off the tongue.
Mm-hmm. Holy smoke, you lost a lot of weight. Holy... What's going on, bro?
Sorry I'm late, everybody.
Keeping you busy in there, right? I know.
How's it going?
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. Likewise. You know, so
Siéntate, bye.
Yeah, if
Nice,
you just
I love it.
kind
I
of
feel like I'm
veer
gonna
a little
Quiere agua?
leftish.
Yeah, why not?
Do you want a haircut?
I'm gonna change.
It's
It's beautiful here.
It's the tiniest little place in the world, but we get a lot done.
Really? It's pretty spacious.
Well, you know,
Well, I
Brooklyn
mean,
size is normal,
that's true,
you know,
that's
but
true.
now
Sit
that
up,
we have
brother.
like
You look good.
mall-sized
Thank you.
places.
Likewise too, and I want to join boxing. You know, I want to go. You know, you guys already
You
been
got
doing it, right?
right.
Well, I my stamina is a little bit better now. That you know when you're like
You're
overweight.
chasing a baby around, aren't you?
Yeah,
That explains.
and stressed, and stressed, you know. But yeah, that definitely adds to it. But this is great, you know. Thank you for inviting me. You know, pleasure. Glad to be
I'm
a part of
honored,
this.
brother. I'm happy to
Likewise.
give you a chance to say who you are and who you work for and what you've done and what the community has gotten out of it,
Yeah.
and challenge a lot of this mischaracterization in media. That don't get me wrong, it hasn't. You know, it's only been on occasion that you've been explicitly named. That's how we met, basically. But at the same, it is who you represent. We've been talking about media characterizations. We did so the previous episode. We're gonna do so this episode. We're going to talk about you, of course.
That's right. But yeah, we should talk about that. I mean, this is why I think this is such a great idea that you have with this podcast and show, because it's like you got to represent that side that doesn't get coverage, right? Like just in general. And when I mean that side means like real, it doesn't necessarily mean like a particular ethnicity, or it's just the dialogue. Because that's why even if you're on some of these forums, even on the post, it's just, you know, it becomes this derogatory conversation instead of not even a conversation, just a derogatory letting out. And
well, I've definitely been I've been accused of that.
We all have, right? We all have, right? Because it's just that it's not really furthering. Part of it is because that it's also being portrayed. It's one portrayal. So then in the only area that you actually have, it's not really actually string thoughtful discussion. It's not at all. So
We got some heavyweights here. So we're gonna put on a pose.
We're gonna put on a pose.
Yeah.
My pose, my radio pose,
Exactly.
This is my radio face.
Right. We gotta do that.
You have a theme song yet?
I've been listening to a lot of Batman. I have. I've been listening to the Batman soundtrack and the Superman soundtrack.
The other day he was talking about we should maybe broadcast live one day, and the first thing that came to my head was Danger Will Robinson. Danger Will Robinson. It's like I've been thinking about Lost in Space for days.
well, we want you to do that at one of our events coming up.
Yeah.
Southside Connects
Yeah.
in September. We'd love to have you on a Saturday. Come out there.
We'll talk about it some more, but I'm down.
He's game for everything, and he's, you know, I'm his willing cohort in crime. You know.
Yeah.
Some would
It's
say.
a nice event.
I haven't seen anything from that.
What's the name of
She's
her
not
film?
done with it, right?
It's
That's
El Puente,
you're
Bridge
right.
to a Gentrified America.
Spears,
Sarah
yeah.
Krauscher.
Okay, so she's not finished.
I
with
think it's
that
awesome
yet.
that you saw it. I think you.
No, I just saw that one little clip of Fran and Jeffrey, which is interesting. They hate what's happening to the neighborhood, what has happened to the neighborhood, which is not this, their tune. 2 years ago, they were thrilled at this. What has happened since then? You know, interesting that she's so over it and was one of the, you know, and she's a big property holder. She owns that block of Wythe and Grand that has all the antique stores and shit on it. It is one of those fair landlords, actually reasonably priced, below market rents.
That's the most valuable piece of property in the neighborhood. She's right by Grand Street Park.
At this point,
I mean, there's
she's-
Radiac on the corner, but Radiac is going to be undone by the Walentis brothers. That's going to be the
Yes.
Pacific Rim of the neighborhood.
There's no brothers, so it's a father and son.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Thank you.
But
This is Brian Paul, writer for the Domino Effect.
yeah, that is still industrial zoning down there. You know, even those. Have you seen those two huge cleared lots right on the waterfront next to the where that building? I always forget
Next
its
to
name.
the DOT side.
The rent on Kent, that old Art Deco warehouse. I forget
111.
the official name.
111 Kent Avenue, which is actually an impressive building
Mhm.
Yes.
in architectural terms, even in history. Right? It's historically significant.
But I don't know who owns those sites, but those sites are zoned M3, just like Domino. So that's why there's nothing going up there. Somebody's holding them on speculation to rezone them.
Brian, what's meant by Zone M3?
Zone M3 means heavy industry, no commercial even allowed. The area where the Wythe Hotel is, for example, is M1, light manufacturing, which means that commercial uses like bowling alleys, bars, and even hotels are allowed to mix in with the industry there. And M3 is heavy industry only, and that's what Domino was zoned before 2010. And that's what those lots next to Domino, that's what the Con Ed site is still zoned, and these empty lots between the Con Ed and Northside Piers are still zoned for heavy manufacturing.
It's a good film, Meredith.
I will check it out.
We went to opening night actually at the town hall.
Where did it open, Brian?
The first place it ever showed was Hunter College, certainly.
That was a good screening. I went to that one.
That was,
Right,
where you were actually surprised that you were made an appearance on the screen. I remember that. So this film actually came out of Hunter College, a rather unique class that's taught there in graduate schools, co-taught between the urban planning department and the integrated media arts master's program, which is called Film and Community Advocacy. I might be getting that title wrong, something like that, but it's co-taught by an urban planning and a film professor. And I think it's been taught 3 times, and students are supposed to pair off into groups of 2 or 3 or 4 and make these small advocacy documentaries. In the past, they've been maybe 20 minutes long or so. Something that could be done in a semester's time. There was actually a good film on the rezoning of Harlem, 125th Street, that came out of this class the prior year.
Was that by Tamara Gubernat? Because she has a
Possibly.
documentary.
It's called Rezoning Harlem, and
It's
that's the
her.
one. Yeah.
That is her.
You've seen it?
I haven't seen it. Tamara lives in Greenpoint.
Oh, interesting.
She lives on Milton Street. She lives on Milton Street, I think, but she's a lifelong resident.
Is she ever going to let us see the footage from the years of recording at CB1 meetings? I would really love to see that stuff. I know she's got to be editing. She's got to be compiling. And there's going to be a wealth of stuff to...
Tamara's been filming for how long?
Good question.
At least 10 years.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Tamara. She's been filming for about a good number of years. And she's filmed Community Board 1 meetings in some significant and contentious years.
And she sat through all the laboriously horrible, long, boring ones as well. You know, very dutifully. I'd be really interested to see what she's putting together, if she's just saving this for posterity, or there's a project, what's going on. But
We'll have to
she's
ask
got a
her.
lot there. Yeah, she should be a guest for sure.
Is Esteban still on the community board?
I believe so. Yeah.
That could be a whole other little conversation. You were on it at one point, or no?
No, I've never been on it. No.
You'd be a fantastic representative.
No, thanks.
You have to generally make nice with the council member or the borough president to get in there.
Right. But once there, fuck them.
Well, it's not, there have been, I don't know if it's ever happened here, but there's been cases after contentious issues where they've cleared community boards out of people who were disagreeing with the council member and the borough president.
Give me an
It's happened.
example, Brian. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I believe this happened at Community Board 9 in Manhattan with the Columbia project, where you had a purge of dissenting community board members. I think it's happened elsewhere as well.
That were to happen here, that would be disturbing. That would probably cause some violence.
What happens here is interesting. I think when there's an undercurrent of people really wanting to join, which was happening a lot last year, and there was a lot of vacancies, and you still have Vincent Abate, who probably should get an honorary position at this point and make a little room. Levin had made a lot of appointments just several months ago, 6 months ago, I think 4 or 5 all at once, and so it's all full up again.
Let's talk about some of those appointments.
I don't know.
Let's research
I
that.
don't know the appointments.
I invited him to come get behind the microphone. He hasn't responded, and I don't expect him to.
The council member?
Yes, because I thought it was only fair. He came up in the previous episode. We mentioned his project, the McCarran Park recent project to repave and to restructure the gutter and drainage. So I thought it was fair. And so I let him know, hey, we mentioned your name.
Did you see that flare up on the North Brooklyn Facebook board?
I did
Where,
not.
I dropped
Do
out
tell.
of that one a while ago. I don't know what goes on in there.
Apparently, Levin allocated, I think, $8,000 or $9,000 of his member item money to the Ridgewood-Bushwick Senior Citizens Picnic,
Oh boy.
even again this year. And this is an annual event where they bus out a few hundred seniors to the state park in Long Island, and it's been traditionally a sort of a not so disguised rally for Vito Lopez and his machine. Despite all what's gone on with Vito Lopez and the sexual harassment and disgraced resignation.
And it's not in his district, is it? Ridgewood-Bushwick's not even in
No, it's
Steve
not
Levin's
Levin's district, right? That's true also. So Teresa Toro pointed this out on that board and made a whole issue of how she should be ashamed of supporting Vito Lopez still tied to Vito Lopez. And Steve Levin wrote back, it's only $8,000, the seniors love it. A lot of times, this would be the only chance seniors get to get out of the city.
His argument is sound until he said this was the only chance. He could have rewarded the seniors in some other medium. He could have rewarded. He didn't have to go to Ridgewood-Bushwick Senior Center. He didn't have to.
Well, I think the issue of politicians paying for these kind of tours is questionable to begin with.
My name is Esteban Duran. I am a lifelong resident of the Southside, Los Ures, here in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. I was born and raised here to parents that moved here from the Dominican Republic. As we all know, this neighborhood has changed a whole lot, and I've been very fortunate to have the ability to actually study, get my higher education degree, University of Connecticut, and during those summers really see what was happening, and becoming older and witnessing what was happening in the neighborhood. And it was really eye-opening, what was happening, and being away and getting that experience of going to college and higher education, and then seeing the way things were unfolding in the neighborhood. And this is a great place. I love the south side of Williamsburg in general, Brooklyn in general too. Proud to be a Brooklyn boy, and saying it, when people didn't, could care less, and we're just like, what's going on over there? What is that crazy place? At a time, the only white people I knew in Brooklyn were the Beastie Boys, who were shouting it out, right? That was the experience, that I had growing up here, and I've been very fortunate to represent my neighborhood at the community board for the last 8 years, since 2005, which was right after the rezoning, which has definitely been a huge catalyst for some of the change that has occurred. Just been a vocal community activist when it comes to a lot of other issues, when it comes to equity and what's happening, especially with the displacement, because this was a neighborhood that many years ago, 20 years ago, really was very different, the face of it, and the census tracts from 1990s would really show that. But yeah, again, it's just a great place to live. Besides that, I've actually ran for office for a local leadership position here, and that's another experience that I wanted to formally challenge the political structure that was here dominating North Brooklyn, and that's something that I was proud to do. And now I have the opportunity to be an organizer at a place that was my home during my teenage years, which is El Puente, 30-year-old nonprofit here in Williamsburg and Bushwick, fighting for peace and justice. Has its own high school, the Academy for Peace and Justice, the first in this country. Who would ever thought, right? The first in this country was established here in 1994, here in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, the South Side. The first high school dedicated to peace and justice, and that's El Puente Academy. And I'm proud to be an organizer for the Greenlight District, which is a 10-year initiative for sustainability here in the South Side and in North Brooklyn in general. And I'd love to talk some more and more details about that and my upbringing. And great that you guys are putting on this show. and happy to be here.
Thanks.
Thank you, Esteban. Brian, give us a little bio. I know you from Vassar.
That's right.
I mean, wow. What a connection.
So,
But you've lived in the neighborhood for a long time, and I just want to say, though, a lot of people admire you. Myself, I admire you. I, of course, admire Esteban, but I tell him this all the time.
Well, I'm not a New York City native. I was actually born in New York City in Einstein Hospital in the Bronx, but I grew up in Westchester, and actually did not come to New York City very often as a child growing up. One of the few things actually I remember about New York City in the 90s is coming off the highway and the squeegee guys being there. It was like this gateway experience into New York City for someone from the suburbs.
This is Giuliani.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, Giuliani's famous work removing the squeegee guys so the suburbanites could travel in safely. A noble accomplishment. Yes, I went to college at Vassar in 2003. That's in the Hudson Valley, 2003, 2007. Then moved to New York City after graduating, and right at the beginning of 2008. So I've lived here over 5 years. I actually lived in Harlem for 4 years. Only have lived in Williamsburg for a little over a year. But I began studying Williamsburg while getting a master's in urban planning at Hunter College. The actual first thing that brought my interest to this neighborhood was studying community planning writ large in New York City, and Williamsburg is one of the few communities that has done something that's called a 197A plan, which is a specific section of the city charter, I believe created in 1989, designed to allow communities to engage in planning. And it requires the Department of City Planning to help community boards and other interested organizations, if they're interested in making one of these plans, to provide technical assistance. And it provides a procedure for these plans getting passed through the channels to become official policy statements, but they are not legally binding in any way like a zoning plan is. So Williamsburg actually composed a 197A plan throughout the 1990s, finally finished it, I think about 2001, and there was two plans. There was a Greenpoint plan and a Williamsburg waterfront plan, right? And the Williamsburg waterfront plan really called for something very, very different than what we've seen happen on the waterfront, which is a low to mid-rise, mixed-use, affordable housing, mix of industry and housing. No 30, 40-story towers, and certainly not this uniformity of Battery Park City style development that we've seen. This document was actually passed through ULURP, the land use process, passed by the City Council and officially approved by the City Council in 2002, just about 1 year before the Bloomberg administration announced its big rezoning effort that essentially threw this thing out the window. So that's how I began studying Williamsburg. So I've been studying Williamsburg for over 4 years. Finally got to move here last year. I'm enjoying being part of the community now.
I've always considered you an authority. Whenever I need to corroborate my arguments, I turn to you.
Well, I appreciate that. My knowledge comes mostly from academic side, from reading documentation. It's a very different kind of knowledge than you and Esteban have in the neighborhood, and especially what I find so interesting about your writing and commentary, Dennis, is that you combine this academic theoretical knowledge with this 30, 40-year knowledge of intimate knowledge of the neighborhood, which is a perspective that I don't think anyone else has.
Well, I don't know if that's true, but I appreciate that, especially coming from you.
Welcome to Williamsburg.
Yeah, man. Welcome.
Wish we had you with all your degrees 20 years ago, you know?
For real. For real, because the people were talking about gentrification in the neighborhood. It definitely wasn't the academic areas of the neighborhood that were talking about it. It was coming out of the streets. It was a grassroots consciousness. And that's neglected, I think, when we discuss gentrification. I haven't gone over a lot of the scholarships, certainly not as much as you. I wonder if gentrification scholarship remembers its origins, because it was coming out of this narrative. You know, there were Puente was involved in it. I was writing 30 Days. Everyone was embroiled in the discussion, even when they weren't using the word gentrification. And everyone had an issue, and there was lots of controversy. The police were descending on an unprecedented scale on the neighborhood. I'm just talking shit.
That's awesome. I love it. That's as old Williamsburg tradition as any, right? And Brooklyn in general, right?
There is a sort of weight and scariness, though, always to think that, like, this is a phenomena that's been studied and still being studied. Like, it really gives you a sense of, like, something's really weird. Something really happened here. Scholars are looking at this and will be looking at it probably for a very long time, if we are to learn anything really, to take something forward and, you know, learn some lessons and how to find it a different way, perhaps.
Well, to its credit, scholarship has expanded dramatically on Williamsburg. It wasn't like 20 years ago. There was surveys and official statements on Williamsburg and records, but in terms of reflection and scholarship, in that sense, there was nothing. Now there's quite a bit of literature that you can turn to. Sometimes I want to smash it up against the wall, but that stuff that you sent me by that Linda Martucci, if that's her name, if I'm pronouncing it right,
So,
that was awesome.
Yeah, I have to get my hands on that.
Yeah. What was it called again?
Oh,
We've got to remember
look
that.
it up. It just came out last year, like, too. It's a pretty new book on gentrification.
An anthology, right? It's a large
A reader?
work, but it's an anthology reader.
No, I haven't seen
And it's
this,
got
actually.
essays by multiple scholars, and one of the essays quotes Williamsburg walks at length. and sophisticated and really, really balanced observations about Williamsburg walks, not hagiography, not insanely almost like religious in its like tenor. This was a detached scholar who was aware of her experience on Bedford Avenue, but still capable of seeing everything and seeing many different perspectives. She mentions the motivations of the developers of Williamsburg Walks, the organizers and the original conceivers, versus the reality of Williamsburg Walks as it is on the street, which is a common theme in gentrification, no?
Definitely. Because what's happening on the ground level, what it's studied, it's not, they're not linked completely in the dialogues. One of the things that growing up here was interesting, and you kind of alluded to this a little bit, Dennis, was that, my parents and the people from Transfiguration Church, which was the Catholic parish where I grew up in and I went for elementary school all the way to 8th grade, they knew about waterfront rezonings since the early 80s. Like, people were already talking about the fact is that things were going to change. At the time, Father Brian Carvelis, who eventually became a Monsignor, Brian Carvelis, may he rest in peace, I think he passed away in 2005, he was basically teaching liberation theology, and the founder and president of El Puente, one of the founders, President Luis Gardner Costa, that was one of his mentors, and El Puente had his roots in Transfiguration Parish. Monsignor Carvelis did that was transformative was that he actually incorporated fraternities into Transfiguration. So you had obviously your weekly masses, but there was also weekly meetings that different fraternities, groups of people met to have these discussions about faith, about awareness of community, and have these conversations and this dialogue going throughout the week as well, not just waiting for Sunday at Mass. And from the pulpit, Father Brian Carvelis was always very aware about and very, and I remember this since he was a kid, he would always be very talking about the concentration and the egotism and about myself and just people too much thinking about me. And that would be the thing, like since 2nd grade, he would always be like, me. That's the type of mentality you have to get away from thinking about, that it is about us, a collective we together, not just about me. I think that was very powerful because that awareness about what was happening also translated into other areas, such as the development of the neighborhood. What was the future for it as a community? When you really look at something like Transfiguration Church and Transfiguration School, which was our savior for a while. Some people might say our savior. There was so many people from this neighborhood that have gone on to accomplish great things. Nelly Rosario, I'm proud to call her a neighbor. She was a neighbor of mine once. She's an academic teaching literature in Texas, and she has a book published, Song of the Water Saints. Many other people have gone on, and just as one example, gone on to do great things, and they were here during the Blight, grew up right in the middle of the Blight of the 70s in this neighborhood, and have gone on to do great things. And that's the type of dialogue that I think gets lost sometimes, where it's kind of like, well, only thing that was out there during that time was horrible, right, crime-ridden streets, and there was nothing else. And there's a huge backdrop of people that were invested, fighting to make sure that their children got a good opportunity, and came from very poor means, but were very still aware of family and other things that people might not necessarily value in this day and age.
Brian, could you please chime in, or Meredith,
yes,
please?
Well, some of the things you're talking about there are the advantages that come from when a community is allowed to put down roots and have some stability for a matter of decades, right? And so what is happening in recent years when there's so much pressure for people to leave because of the rent? Where are people going, and how are those social institutions and advantages being lost?
No, I think you're definitely right. Like, I know my parents, my dad got here, I would like to say like 68 or 69, but he ended up going back to the Dominican Republic and married my mom. So they basically came here, I would say, in the 70s, and they were kind of like that first wave of Dominicans that were here. And it was interesting, like even amongst the culture in the neighborhood itself, growing up, there was like a large Puerto Rican versus Dominican type competition. And it was weird because I grew up in the midst of that, but my parents didn't, because my mother would always be quick to say, like, no, like, do not fall into those traps of, your generation thinking that that's a legitimate actual rivalry. Like, when I was here, Puerto Ricans were the ones helping us get jobs in the factories. They were the ones telling us this is how much you should ask for pay, do not accept anything less. So there was a solidarity that existed, that when you kept going on, it was kind of like, I guess there goes this thought of this idea of like growing up in like the ghetto, you know what I mean? In the sense of growing up in a neighborhood that was poor, where you would lash out to your neighbors just because you didn't understand the social construct of that you were all in this together in a lot of ways, and you go into these rivalries, and a lot of it had to do around resources, like resource, obviously some of it ethnic pride too, right? Like I'm from here, you're from there, so that was interesting growing up in the 90s, and yeah, and even through the 90s, there was still a large amount of it was still a very Latino neighborhood, but definitely you started feeling those pressures of the high rent coming in, and people moving out to other neighborhoods because of the raising of the rents. And it was very similar to what happened in the Lower East Side too, because I remember that I actually got to go to high school in the Lower East Side, and I was able to see how that neighborhood was also changing a lot too.
Well, I think if you look at the actual census numbers, since 1990, we've lost a third of the Hispanic community that was here in 1990, according to the census. Just looking 2000 versus 2010, Hispanic population in Community Board 1 declined by 24%. Non-Hispanic white population in Community Board rose by 26%. So it's almost like a one-to-one replacement of people.
Which suggests something. It's when we're talking about gentrification, we're talking about an abstraction. But it has a physical dimension that is undeniable. I mean, and there's no more solid proof than that. I mean, you've got an increase and a decrease that are proportionally inverse. Preaching to the council here, to the, what is it?
Choir.
The choir.
I wish we would have preached to the council. Maybe they got it. No, I'm just kidding. Especially with the 197A plan. But I'm sorry.
No,
Yeah.
please. And Ryan, I
You
interrupted
see the very same change in Fort Greene and Bedford Avenue area, Bedford Stuyvesant. Also now going around Prospect Park to Crown Heights, Prospect Lefferts, and down Hispanic community in South Park Slope and northern Sunset Park is also the same pattern happening there too.
Brian, I want to pose the question to you specifically about this starting date, 1990. That's not the starting date, though, of your film,
No.
the subject matter.
No, and there were early attempts at doing some kind of a history of New York City since 1970 even, but it was too ambitious.
Massive.
It couldn't be done correctly, and it was just too much.
You could have done it, but probably not in a semester.
No, the film actually ended up taking 2 years to make, even without it.
I want to just touch base in terms of the 197A plan.
Yeah.
The 197A. And this is just my feelings of it. I feel that that plan basically got usurped by private interests, developers too. So you had a plan that actually had roots in community, right? In community, putting a plan together, and then it just kind of got taken, and then it got put on steroids, and it became a giveaway to this influx of wealth that wants to come in, and knew that the city was changing, so now is the time to cash in on it. And that 197A, I just feel it became the vehicle for like some of this happening in a way that wasn't planned correct.
Unintentional Trojan horse.
I don't think it has to do with the 197A. I think it's just I recently read the EIS, like the environmental impact statement for the Two Trees plan actually, and it's full of even that is full of references to the 197A plan, because they have to go back and reference policy in the area in the last 20-30 years, and so they say, well, this is like the 197A plan because it's mixed use and there will be some affordable units here, and they throw out the rest of it. So that's exactly what you're saying. It is constantly referenced, but only these vague generalities that.
Before we forget, though, let's go back to my earlier point. Your film, its subject matter is specifically, well, not specifically, but it focuses on the 2005 rezoning. What's the difference between the 2005 rezoning and 1990 as it's presented as the beginning of this graph in your document? Because it would be best to explain that to people who are listening to this podcast that don't know.
Well,
what does that mean? What's the 2005 rezoning?
Well, let's start with 1990, talking to the 20 25 people we interviewed for Domino Effect, and while reading the neighborhood history, people generally say that is around the point where a significant number of artists and these early gentrifiers and whatnot started to come into the neighborhood in heavy numbers. If you look at the numbers from 1990 to 2000, you see the beginnings of a change where there was about a 9% drop in Hispanic population and a 5% increase in white population. So you see a beginning of a change, but you were not seeing any large-scale condominium developments during that period. It's only with the 2005 rezoning that you begin to see that, and I believe this is a major factor in what's accelerated and put this gentrification on steroids, so to speak. Because what 2005 rezoning did was, number one, it unlocked nearly in the entire waterfront. Good to note, Domino was not included in 2005 rezoning. So everything north of Domino was basically opened up for these enormous Battery Park City style condominium towers. And only up till now, only a few of them have been built. And this is what you see at North 5th and North 7th, Northside Piers and the Edge, they are called. And there was, due to community activism, there was affordable housing requirements put in on the waterfront. Originally the rezoning was proposed with no affordable housing. It's important to recognize that. So there was this concession made there, but nobody in the community wanted 30, 40-story towers on the waterfront, as far as everything I've read and everybody I've talked to. But this was...
Kafka, how did it happen then? How did it happen then if no one wanted it?
Well, let me just
Like,
finish explaining the rest
sorry,
of the rezoning
sorry.
first before... That's a good conversation. The other parts of the rezoning were this large swath of the south side was rezoned. It had this very fine-grained mixed-use zoning that was done in the 70s to protect the mixture of an industry and residence, where basically it was lot by lot, as I understand it. If a lot was industrial use, it could not be switched to residential use. The 2005 rezoning changed this mixed-use zoning to allow residential to be built anywhere. And this is why you saw this tremendous surge in demolition of industrial properties, especially in the area south of McCarran Park, following the rezoning. The north side really transformed with these large, extremely expensive condominium and rental buildings. And originally, there was no requirement, there still is no requirement for affordable housing in any of those buildings. And originally, there was no, they could get the 421A tax break without having any affordable housing there also, which is a 10, most of the buildings are 10 or 15, I don't know how it's decided exactly if it's 10 or 15 years, but it's 10 or 15 years of reduced property tax. And this was as of right. Anyone who built any condominium building from 2005, anyone who poured a foundation from 2005 to June 2008 got this tax break as of right without having any affordable housing whatsoever. So that is really an example of state-sponsored gentrification. You flip on this switch that allows them to build the buildings, and then you give them, and then they're tax-free. It really created this tremendous change in the neighborhood in those years, 2005 till present.
No, and I want to say, then some of the factory buildings also, they got redone. They got
Yes.
redid as, so even if it wasn't a new one, some of them got turned
Lofts,
from,
yeah.
they turned into lofts. And like 20 years ago, 1993, Summer Youth, right around this time, 20 years ago, I was working at, it was a buckle factory, warehouse distributor, right on the corner of North 8th and Roebling, and it's lofts now. So even that actually was a guy that was just importing and shipping and selling thousands of different types of buckles, like ended up just, moving because, they were gonna flip it into lofts.
I want to ask everyone, given everything that you've just told us, both of you, are all that construction that you've mentioned since that's been impacted by the 2005 rezoning, has it been worth the expense?
Worth the expense? I think if you were to take a walk down Roebling Street from McCarran Park, 9 out of 10 people would be disgusted at what they see because it is atrocious, out of context architecture, cheaply built, and when they made this zoning, they could have required ground floor retail or ground floor art space in the zoning. They required none of that. So 9 out of 10 of these buildings do not even have any retail on the ground level. It's just total residential, because that's the root of this whole problem, is that that's what nets you the most per square foot if you're the owner of the property. This was just flipped on. Technically the whole area is still zoned mixed use, but no profit-minded property owner is going to build anything but a condominium or apartment building if they have the choice.
Wait, Brian. Are you saying that if someone decided to take advantage of the mixed use and not build apartments, they would not profit? They wouldn't.
I'm saying it's still legal in the zoning to have a factory there. And somebody could build a factory there and make $15 a square foot on it. But are they going to do that if they're allowed, or are they going to build an apartment building and get $60 a square foot on it or higher? You know, it's a pretty easy choice if you're an investor.
I just wonder if
real estate developer.
Well, if we think in terms of that kind of investment, yes.
Right, and that's actually a whole other facet to this conversation. Is there's always a contradiction between what's best for the property owner and what's best for the community and even the economy of the city as a whole, right? Because industry needs the space. The industry provides much higher paying jobs, $45,000, $50,000 a year. Majority are people of color and immigrants who have these jobs. This is an important part of the city's fabric, yet if you're just an individual property owner sitting there, you're not thinking about that. So that's kind of what the point of urban planning is to begin with, is to resolve these contradictions between what's good for the pocket of the property owner and what's good for the economy of the larger city. But if you just open it up and say you can build anything, that gets lost.
And definitely what gets lost in there is communities with a large amount of displacement, because one of the things that often goes unmentioned with all this new development is the impact that it has on existing developments that are there, and the push to increase there. So while you might not be a new building going up, people are going to be like, oh, I do own this property, I am going to raise rents because people 2 blocks away from me are charging, X percentage higher. I'm going to do the same. So then it does have another ripple effect that completely is not discussed.
Induced demand,
Well,
is the term
That's the term.
that you're talking about, and yeah, it's very obvious from anyone who lives in the area that building these towers with hundreds of wealthy people coming in transforms the neighborhood and creates, the tenement next door. Now the wealthy people want that space also. If you just look at the number of apartments, again from census figures, the number of apartments renting at $2,000 a month or more, there was hardly a single apartment in all of Williamsburg and Greenpoint renting at $2,000 or more in the year 2000. And in 2010, they counted about 6,300 of them.
but the number had already increased tenfold by the year 2000.
Well, by the year 2000, it increased to 300 from zero. So it increased to infinity.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
But this is exponential rise in the number of expensive apartments that only people making $80,000 or more, the minimum, can really afford. And on the other side, you see the number of inexpensive apartments, number of apartments that are really affordable, $1,000 or less, just plummet from 37,000 units to less than 22,000 units in 10 years. So,
Which ends up being the current reality that a lot of times is not discussed. Again, it's just the issue of the remaining Latino population that's here, or less wealthy population, and the fact that many of them are living in conditions where they have to double up in apartments. They are constantly under pressure when it comes to, especially the buildings that are not rent controlled. They're not rent controlled. It's just a lot of pressure there, and this is really talking about displacement of families at times, because you could only fit so many people in a 2-bedroom apartment without being like, I need to change things up. And
How do you feel about people in the media whose attitude has basically been fuck 'em?
I would be like, fuck you, this is a real community, stop fucking it up,
I mean, we're not just talking about trolls, really. No. We're not just talking about trolls in public comments.
You see it all the
We're
time.
talking about New York, all the way up to the New York Times.
You can't afford it, too bad.
Right.
Go somewhere else.
Yeah, and I mean that's
Go
completely.
to
Yeah.
East New York.
Or if you don't like
You know,
it, go somewhere else.
Right.
You know, we're supposed to like this as well, not just tolerate it.
And I mean, and you know, outside of the normal New York response that I just gave, I mean, it's something to be said of like, you know, you want a community that's diverse, right? Like that's probably what attracted people to New York. I want to be in diversity. You know, where I live at is only just one way. Let me go to this place. Well, you should be concerned about that because it is your vibrant neighborhood, which and I would say that, you know, the community here has been, you know, very receptive of people. You know, I wouldn't say people here are not like, fuck you, Whitey, go home. You know, that hasn't happened.
Williamsburg is
Right?
in the predicament it's in because of its hospitality. Williamsburg is a hospitable place. All this characterization of its hostility is
Yes, it's just completely misplaced.
For
You're right
the
about that.
most part, I've seen very, very seldom instances of racial tension here.
Yeah,
But
and-
I can tell you an anecdote just because it's kind of funny. Riding my bike one time, right down near Domino actually, right near Peter and Paul Church. A car started to back up right at me, and I had to really, you know, scream and flail to make him see me and not get run over. And this guy was backing up from 20 yards ahead, just kind of very recklessly. So I just like hit the car with my open hand, like, you know, come on, what are you doing? Like not, and the guy, it happened to be a Hispanic driver, and he gets out with his friend, and they're very, very angry and all in my face. Yeah. And the last thing, no, I just remember the last thing that he said was, "Don't forget where you are. That this is still our neighborhood." Was kind of the subtext of that.
What do you think of that? I mean, that attitude definitely exists. There's no denying it.
Yeah.
There's definitely an attitude like, yo, this is my territory. I mean, when we talk about that time before, that everyone has projected into a mythical plane, right? When we talk about that, I think of it more in terms of like the Book of Judges, really. There was a lawlessness, but it wasn't amongst the Puerto Rican and Hispanic groups. The lawlessness was government and white people who decided to withdraw their support because they didn't like the people who were coming into the neighborhood. So the gangs rose, and that was the original intent of the gangs. Sure, like they had all their paraphernalia and all like, you know, that stuff going on, but if you had a problem in the neighborhood, if you had a problem on your block, you went to the bikers on your block, and they handled it. And that was authority. That was law back then. It wasn't, you know, the people were not lawless in their nature. You know, it was Union Avenue had these gangs who were always caring about the people that were in their charge, and around the corner were all the churches. And there was a deep connection between the gangs and the churches. And many of them were redeemed, gave up their life, and some continued. And some were put away, and some died. And some were murdered. But talking only about their murderers is a radical reduction of the entire experience of that community. I myself find that when I read these media accounts, I want to find these reporters and validate all their stereotypes.
This story I just told you was kind of like two stereotypes encountering each other and just seeing each other as stereotypes. You talked about on your first recording.
The first
The
episode.
racism is still in the neighborhood, and people still just kind of see, there's some immediate judgment that goes on when you see someone of a certain group.
But a lot of this racism is a secret desire, right? Because you yourself said, and we also, I hear a lot about these racial tensions, and I'm like, wow, a lot of this is imagined, But at the same time, there it is. It's on media. There are people in the neighborhood saying some of the most horrible things you could ever imagine about another human being. And they're saying it flagrantly, and they're defiant when you point it out to them. And you point out to them like, hey, the internet is going to outlast you. This is permanent. Watch what you say. This is how you're going to be judged in the future. And there are a lot of people in Williamsburg who don't seem to give a fuck.
Oh, they're all anonymous though commenters on Brooklyn Paper you're talking about, or one person with 10 identities on Brooklyn Paper.
Man, the anonymity are the pixels that we see on the screen because that IP address is recorded, and that's what's important.
Absolutely.
That's what's important.
They may
and
choose
that's
to
what's
publish
going to be
that one day.
right.
Too.
Sure.
Who knows?
Sure.
Who knows? I'll be outed for my 87 different names. Actually, I'm banned from there anyway, so no more me.
Got banned.
I got banned.
Did you join Dennis in that band?
he got back in, but I didn't get back in.
Yeah.
But I'm
No,
not
Gotham is
willing to
banned
grovel
me
in
and
front
Kurt.
of. I don't know who I'd have to grovel to anyway at BP, but it ain't happening. So.
I've had a lot of my comments deleted on Brooklyn Paper's threads. But now, you know, just like Meredith will tell you, Meredith has also had many of her comments deleted, and it's bewildering as to why they've been deleted.
Well, when you
It's
see
not
what
abusive,
stays,
cursing,
though,
or-
what stays, it's
Right.
just vile and ridiculous. People using other people's identities and just saying really overly sexualized stuff that makes no sense. I really wonder about some of the electric complexes that some of these gents have on the Brooklyn Paper.
There's one dude, he impersonated this Avatar die hipster. It was clearly an
right.
impersonation. It was awful. It was like you read it and it was deranged and twisted. And in my mind, I thought, wow, imagine if this person read this out loud to another human being in the street. I mean, they'd get put away maybe, you know. And some of it is truly deranged, but there it is.
The only other
There
time
it is.
people get that crazy is in reality is about their cars.
Well, given the price of insurance in Brooklyn, you know.
There are people.
No. Brian is talking about car ownership because people be crazy on Brooklyn Paper's threads talking about cyclists versus car owners. That's another episode because
That's
that
definitely
is
another episode.
wow.
When you talk about place as commodity, that's where I think people get really crazy behind the scenes in the comments. As you know, it's some heated stuff. I mean, there are some really vocal pro gentrification people in the neighborhood, but strangely enough, they
Tear down all those vinyl shitty buildings and get rid of them, clear them out.
Get rid of the knuckle draggers. Yeah, that was one of the comments. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but the word knuckle dragging was used to describe people who frequent White Castle. You know, let's be real. It's not just Puerto Ricans and blacks who've been going to that White Castle. It's just so ridiculous, you
I
know?
go every Thursday at 9 a.m. if anybody wants to hang out with me there.
Every time I see that,
Slider, right?
every time I see that White Castle, I wonder when it will turn into a condominium.
Well, it did. It's the lot's on the market right now, and so they are trying to find another one.
They would call that underutilized in real estate
Absolutely,
speak.
that's the word.
What
in
does
the
that
article,
mean, Brian?
underutilized.
Tell us.
Underutilized means that it's not being used to its full profit potential. So, you know, if you're in that mindset, you can just go around and scout the neighborhood and take down all the soft sites. You know, that is another word for it. Ripe for development.
And what's askew in this, and I'm going to just talk a little bit about El Puente and the Greenlight district, what we're trying to do. What's askew in this is definitely also the impacts of just infrastructure here. You know, with so many new developments, what does that mean for our environment here? You know, the physical space. And that's something that we all have to coexist, right? Even though we might have our own biases against each other, and we still have to coexist. With all this rampant development, it really also opens up the question of what are we doing to actually sustain this? I mean, we really dodged a bullet when it came to Hurricane Sandy. I mean, that could have just had happened on the Lower East Side. It could have been here if a couple of factors were different. So one of the things that we've been working on in El Puente is the Greenlight district is to really start focusing on the sustainability of our community, to really look at it holistically when it comes to affordable living. So having to do with you know, the cost of your electric and heating bills, your utilities, to discussing ways that the development, what's out there, how you could raise your voice about it, arts and culture, how we should really be promoting each other's arts and culture, you know, as a community, make Williamsburg a draw, not just wait for, you know, outsiders to come in and say this is Williamsburg, you know, celebrate our own. Also to look at how health and wellness is part of that, how we could become more, you know, healthy and live a better life, and that has to do with regarding what's available to us. That's something that actually there's some youth health explorers that El Puente has that were doing this work, where they were actually looking at different census tracts and looking at access to healthy quality food, and they were actually seeing gentrification creeping up in the data that they saw, in a sense of like other sections closer to the waterfront had cleaner streets, like less cracks, food that was different, food that was pricier, but also more access to other foods.
Let's
that
emphasize that it's a higher consumption rate over there, because if sanitation decided to not pick up the garbage, it would be as high as a mountain, in a short time. It's not like in the Southside. There are people in who traffic the Northside, North 3rd Street, for example. If sanitation is not picking up the garbage there, or whether it's private or public, if someone is not there plucking the cigarettes out of the plants that have been potted outside in the street, the garbage would be waist high in a couple of weeks.
Another thing, but just a little observation about garbage is I think you can always tell like the cheapest landlords and developers instantly from whether or not the garbage cans are out in front of the building and it's a new luxury building. The guy didn't even bother to put a garbage room in the building. He wanted every single square
the
foot.
illegal bin
Yes.
holders on the streets.
Or even just like out in front in bins, where he could have built a utility room in there, but he wanted every last square foot for his apartments.
I was shocked to see a building that actually had bike racks in the lobby recently, like 4 holders for bikes, and it's like, wow, that is a luxury. I mean, because these guys are tight with stuff like that. It makes so much sense, but sense doesn't matter. And
everything that you were talking about is also things that the city would be doing with the community if there was real city planning going on. And this is, I would love to, have you guys focus on this with the new administration. If there's, Department of City Planning changes its ways, because right now, basically, all they do is change zoning and respond to developers' requests. There's no
A rubber
This
stamp.
is not what happens in other cities where you have where this analytical process goes on, where you look at the community, you look at what its needs are, and you make all these policies, and that's what real planning is, and that's what happens in other cities. It doesn't happen here.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is where the power, what we're doing with the Puente is take that back into our own hands, right? Like if the city's not going to do it, we need, we're the ones that need to do it, enforce it. But you're right about that. I mean, it's not good when it's a rubber stamp.
Esteban, let's talk about the Greenlight District.
Mm-hmm.
When did it start? When was it conceptualized?
So it was conceptualized in 2010, and it was formally launched September 16, 2011. And it was really just talking to residents about what were their feelings about the neighborhood and what was happening. And that's where these core areas kind of came up, because people, by far, people's highest concern was, am I going to be able to live in Williamsburg, in the future, the way that it's going? And it even though that's kind of like the top thing, there was other factors in it, because it's like the health, how healthy, what access you have to healthcare and healthy foods, that depends on also your decisions that you make. So that's where it became this 5-prong area of like arts and culture, affordable living, health and wellness, green and open spaces, and education. And Dennis knows, because education, we were involved in these co-location fights, and those were like, I'm glad Dennis stopped me from getting into my, ghetto Brooklyn, wanting to attack somebody.
I had to break up a fight.
But
here we go, validating stereotypes.
but it's just galling how, again, that they're gonna have meetings for a school that's on South 3rd between Driggs and Roebling, and they're gonna have the meeting on North 6th. It's like, you know what? Be upfront about it and have that in the community. You're scared, and then you're being scared to actually stop you from doing the right thing, which is being full front and center to the community. Because that's where the real honesty is. At least there's honesty and respect in that you're not hiding and doing these things, introducing people in another part of the neighborhood where you'll be quote unquote more better received. So
how did this happen, Esteban, though? How did it happen that a school that's located in the South Side, that had in an area historically known for activism, radical activism and thinking, how did this happen? How could it be that one day we wake up and suddenly JHS 50 is being taken over by another school, a charter school no less?
That's part of this catering to new residents in the community and their ideas of education, what's the best, and the perception that all the local schools is just full of future dropouts, and these are some things that happen in other parts of the city too. Because that's what's interesting about the gentrification thing too. Here we are talking about Brooklyn, but let's be honest, it's happening everywhere, right? In El Barrio, in all these areas. So,
What does that suggest? Are we inviting it in? Really? Like, is it because of us? The
no.
people in the community. I mean, people in the past, we talk all the time. If there's one thing that we talk about before, we talk about Clemente projects getting taken over and their battles between the Submarine and Puerto Ricans in the South Side. What has become of that? Like,
It happens to be where you are, not. I mean, this is happening in Harlem. It's happening in, traditionally white working class areas like Greenpoint.
there seems to be this sedation that's come over everyone.
Well, I mean, I think it's being aided and abetted by the the influence and the big money influence in trying to do things.
Well then, let's talk about Walentas. Because this parallels the fact that JHS 50 can in the South Side can have its guts removed by a party in the North Side.
Well, we talk about the original Domino project first. So the Domino Sugar Factory was in business from about 1860 to 2004, and at one employed a few thousand people at its high point, was employing more than 500 in its later years still. And the factory shut down in 2004. Some of what was involved in the shutdown involved labor disputes, constant labor disputes between the unions there and the owner, American Sugar. But this also took place right in the context of the waterfront rezoning. And folks asked about Domino during that process and were told by the city, Domino will remain manufacturing, was the public comment. But very soon after the 2005 rezoning finally went through, and that was a contentious final hour agreement that allowed that to happen. There was huge community opposition to the initial plan, which had no affordable housing. Community people were calling for 40% affordable housing. It was a unified Northside, Southside demand. A lot of people were talking about having more mixed-use character, lower, not towers either. Something more like the 197A we talked about recently. But at the, I think when the plan was in the city council stage of approval, there was an agreement, and I wasn't there, so I don't know the exact details of all this, but from what I understand, there was a compromise worked out between the Bloomberg administration and the local city council members here. At that time, Diana Reyna was still in office her final year, and David Yaski was the north side in the district that Steve and Levin currently hold. And there was an agreement on 30% affordable housing if all the zoning incentives were taken up. I think there was a baseline of 20% though, and this was enough for many of the community organizations to agree to his support. Most prominently, Churches United led the way in agreeing to this compromise, from what I understand. So shortly after this 2005 rezoning was enacted, I think actually right before, the Domino Sugar was sold to a partnership of the Community Preservation Corporation and Isaac Catan was a co-investor, a luxury developer who's done smaller buildings all around Brooklyn, nothing on this scale. And Community Preservation Corporation is this strange entity which is a conglomerate of all the major banks and financial institutions in the New York metropolitan area, pretty much founded in the 70s in order to help them fulfill the requirements of Community Reinvestment Act, which was a law requiring banks to invest in local neighborhoods.
Which was punitive.
Well, yeah, these were neighborhoods this was the big problem in the 50s, 60s, and until this law was redlining. Right? Banks would not give loans, even if people had good credit. They couldn't get a loan to fix their house.
Because that's an important distinction to be made.
Yeah.
Because the way CPCR characterizes itself is as an altruistic organization.
Right.
But its founding is based on it's punitive. Community Reinvestment Act was legislated as a response to redlining,
Right.
correct? What is redlining, Brian?
Well, redlining is banks used to basically not make loans in entire neighborhoods. And the line on the bank's maps was red, so it's called a red line. All over the inner city, across America. In the 50s and 60s, this was done. Whole areas
In
where
this
you...
neighborhood, would it be street by street,
No, it
or
was an
blocks,
entire
entire?
It was, maybe...
And
they-
what was that area, Brian? What was that area that was redlined?
Southside Williamsburg was certainly in it.
You better believe that.
There might have been parts on Northside where it was a little easier to get a loan. It was the yellow line zone. But it certainly wasn't...
That'd be an interesting
Yeah.
link to put up if we could find a map of
Yeah.
that. I'd like to see that.
And so this vehicle, Community Preservation Corporation, was founded in the 70s to basically funnel investment from the banks to low-income neighborhoods in the city. And that was what they did for a long time, was just financing for not just affordable housing, but market rate also, but in areas, and also funding people's renovations, rehabbing of existing buildings. And this is still what they did, part of what they did, but at some point in the last 10 years, they started funding straight up luxury projects also. And this is actually what ended up bringing them down and forcing them to sell Domino, was this misguided, there's actually, I did an article in Gotham Gazette about this, where they were funding, yeah.
Can you provide us that link? We're going to put the link
Absolutely.
on the Facebook page, and we're also going to put a link to the New York Times page reporting on CPCR's
Yes.
troubles in this misguided investment.
So they were actually throughout 2000 to 2000, throughout this period, were funding strictly luxury projects in gentrifying areas in New York City. And also the metropolitan region, even areas that weren't gentrifying, like Paterson, New Jersey, for example, they funded a huge market rate project that ended up being a failure. And it was these projects that ended up bringing financial ruin on them, and having them, they basically had to sell Domino Sugar after they rezoned it to bail out the rest of the company. But that's the Community Preservation Corporation, CPC, that bought Domino Sugar in very late 2004. And soon after they bought this, they pursued the rezoning of it, working a plan. And from the very beginning, I remember a lot of this is my first-hand information, second-hand information here is from the interview we did with someone who's not even around anymore, I think Paul Cogley from Churches United, who was Churches United's planner.
Do with the glasses
Yes.
blonde hair, right?
And I don't know what, I've heard that organization kind of has vanished.
Yeah, I could provide just a little bit here, and I'm glad you mentioned Churches United.
And when you were involved,
Yeah, because Churches United, definitely, Churches United wasn't even a 501c3 at that point. So in 2003, Bishop Sullivan, who actually just passed away maybe not even a month ago, or just over a month ago, he was a bishop here in Brooklyn. He had the idea of organizing around the rezonings that was already happening, and this access of this talk about access to affordable housing. So Churches United for Fair Housing was just a group of church parishioners that were organizing to have an influence and say we need affordable housing. So in 2004, at that point they got a director. His name was Father Jim O'Shea. He's a great person. He's working in Bed-Stuy with the Reconnect Project, doing some great work with youth there. But anyway, Father Jim O'Shea was a director at the time. Definitely, when it came up, leading up to the 2005 rezoning, it really was a rush process towards the end. And what I distinctly remember was how the 40% that we were advocating for was something that the majority of us never were comfortable with abandoning. The 40% was something that we had a right. There was waterfront vigils.
What do you mean by 40%, Esteban?
40% of anything built on had to be automatically affordable housing. Automatically. That was the line in the sand that Churches United had written. I honestly don't know the behind the scenes machinations of what happened. It was definitely a lot of upset people who were not happy that there was compromise made. And a lot of that was influenced from people in positions of power. People like Assemblyman Lopez, people like the mayor of the city, Mayor Bloomberg, who wanted this to happen because they knew it was a huge boom to be able to have and develop the city, and say, tout all of these great things that they're doing. So I'm not gonna sit here and say that it was completely them, that there weren't other players involved, but that was definitely a big influence, because what was basically went down to was 33%. What was put was that the as of right would be so low that it made every sense that any developer was gonna be a no-brainer. If they didn't take it, they were gonna have to just build so low it wasn't gonna even be worth it. So that was kind of like the compromise that it was sold on, that the 33% was the best that we could have gotten. And it's unfortunate because, obviously looking back, hindsight's always 20/20, but that was the time that the 40% as a community we really should have stuck to and
What
we could have
about
gotten.
just the very idea of giving up on the issue of these giant towers in exchange for the affordable housing? Is that something you would still be comfortable with in hindsight?
If in giving up
This trade of amount of affordable housing for these giant buildings coming in on the waterfront, and that's basically the compromise that was worked out.
Yeah, and I think that's something else that was kind of foolish. Right? I mean,
When we look at the Northside Piers and the Edge, how do we feel about the affordable housing that we've been given?
Right.
Really, Meredith, how do you feel? I mean, you've been there.
Yeah, I have been there. I have friends that live in, the affordable side. But it's very, very different than, the rest of it. And I don't even know how they feel about being there necessarily. They don't feel super welcome. I know that. They feel fortunate in that they get to stay for an amount that they feel is truly affordable. It is within their income. They're really grateful for it, but it's an awkward kind of place to be in many ways.
I say that we reinforced and magnified a disparity that shouldn't exist in the first place.
I think you're totally right, for sure. I mean, if you look at those apartments, there's no access to a lot of the amenities that other people have, and it really is, you're like second-rate, second-class citizens.
Even beyond the amenities and utilities, man, because I tell you, I slept on the waterfront. You want to talk about utility? I didn't give a fuck about, looking back there, I slept amongst bricks and I didn't give a fuck, And I mean, I ask myself all the time walking by there, because it's the place where I store my memories. I ask myself, was this worth it? And I'm guessing the developers are like, sure, yo, it's great, we're great.
Well, the people at Greenpoint Landing Development are at least in print, acting as if they have learned a lesson from the disparity at the edge and whatnot, and they're gonna do it different. Oh, Walentis is gonna do it different.
He says this all the time. He makes reference to that particular parcel. He makes reference to it all the time, and negative, always a negative
Let's
reference.
finish the narrative of what happened first. So CPC worked in close concert with Churches United and other groups in the Southside to develop a plan for Domino. And what was agreed upon as principles was 30% affordable housing and at income levels where a variety of people in the community could afford it. So not just everyone at $50,000, like is often a range of incomes in the affordable housing, going all the way up to home ownership also. Community facility being in there, a certain amount of open space. There was a job training program at some point involved, right? And this was all worked out over a period of years because certain other groups and interests close to the factory were adamantly against high-rise development on that site and remain to this day, and fought it tooth and nail every step. So the landmarking of the site, where the main refinery building was landmarked, meaning it cannot be torn down, it has to be maintained. That stalled activity for 3 years or so until that was landmarked. And then the recession hit in 2008, and it was kind of stalled for a couple more years, and then until they finally launched the rezoning in 2010, when in the end, despite the community board voting against it, not unanimously, about 2/3, 3/5 to 2/5, or even 2/3, I'm not exactly sure, it was a fairly close vote. Community board voted against it, went through the borough president, city planning commission, city council, and was eventually approved in July 2010 finally, with very minor modifications, bringing the height of the towers down. This is the original Domino plan we're talking about. You had this period after it was approved where you're wondering when are they going to start building. From July 2010 for 2 years. There was no building. The press would ask what's going on. They would say, we're going to start soon.
They put up scaffolding.
Yeah.
They put up scaffolding.
But then in March of 2012, this whole story broke that CPC was actually out of money and could not develop the site and needed to sell. It was a few months later when it was sold for 2 trees. Now, 2 trees finally closed on the property last September or so, was it? And 185 million is the final price they ended up paying, which is 130 million more than CPC paid for the site from American Sugar, and all we got was a stinking zoning change. not an hour of labor put in on that site for $130 million profit. And this part of the problem, I think, in that whole situation was that the CPC was never actually forced to show their financials and demonstrate that they had the wherewithal to build this. And the key community benefits were not written into the zoning. 30% affordable housing is not required by the new developer, only 20% is. 30% affordable housing, which was the call of supporters of the project the entire time, is not legally required. It was just a memorandum of understanding signed the last day of city council negotiations. So I think a lot of the people who were supporting us were blindsided by that in the first place. I know Luis Acosta at Puente was one of the only people that made a statement saying, if they don't end up with 30% on that site, there's going to be a problem. He said something like, we'll be, if they change the plan, we'll be in the streets protesting them. And
Definitely.
yeah, and so now you have this situation where 2 trees came out with a plan in March, which is quite different than the CPC plan.
It's very different, and I just want to say too that I think it's important to note that, when CPC was there with us, I think that the community came divided into its sides, and I think that was harmful to the process, because it was obvious that there was a certain amount of understanding that one side knew about certain dynamics and that this project was going to present, that rezoning was going to present, and then there was another side where it was community residents from the south side being like, this is one of the last parcels that we could actually have as having affordable housing in our community, maintain and a large amount of it, that maybe there was a reluctance to really work together for whatever reasons. And I know that existed on the side I was on, which was on the side of because I voted even on the community board to approve this rezoning. The reluctance to really work together to be able to learn and say, that stuff needs to be put in writing. This stuff needs to be, you need to look at it this way, and also understanding that yes, we want to have a dynamic waterfront, but there needs to also be understanding that we want promises of low affordability and that it's going to maintain community residency in the long term. So I think that was also a dynamic of it. It sucks because as you mentioned, there's a windfall profit that CPC has, and they walked away from this community. And I've been in intense conversations with some of the leadership there, and I don't have a lot of respect for them for the way that they've treated this community and the way that they've continued to treat this community, which is basically not acknowledging that Williamsburg, this Domino project, saved CPC. They are in debt to us to actually come through with these promises. I don't think they would have
gotten the rezoning if it wasn't for all that support that came out to the hearings.
I wanted to read this couple of lines that Jonathan Smith included in his book, To Take Place, which is a book on ritual, religion, and geography. I wanted to get a last statement, if you want to provide one, after I read this. Quote, "Home is not best understood as the place where I was born or the place where I live. Home is the place where memories are housed. As such, home is unique. There's no place like home."
I think that speaks to the desire of people to plant roots and be able to have a stable place to make a home. and not have to worry about being forced out by market forces within a couple of years. If you know that you're going to have to leave within 5 years, then you are not going to make the same investment in creating those memories and those ties that create real homes. Homes versus property, kind of what you're talking about. And if the city leadership just sees everything as property, and there's not going to be any care for this concept of home.
We see like places so commodified now and twisted in the marketing of real estate. Just the other day when the Carl Fisher building on North 12th Street that put in the big shadow over that hunk of McCarran, their ad for it is a 25-year-old skinny hipster guy holding his Toto from the Wizard of Oz dog, and the text says, "You're not in Brooklyn anymore." Implying like we've brought Kansas to you, and Brooklyn, this branded commodity is so malleable that if Brooklyn as is isn't good enough, well, no problem, because here's Kansas. You can have that too, and it was.
What do you think of the fact that Kansas was the main concentration for petitions on behalf of the Westboro Baptist Church so that they could demonstrate against soldiers on the White House government website?
That's kind of a non sequitur, I think.
Really? Well, if you bring Kansas into Brooklyn,
Well, I think
again, we're getting into another episode because really there should be a conversation about libertarian.
I think it's more about the innocence of Dorothy. It's not. I'm not saying this is just perfect for Midwesterners, though there are a lot. I did try to eat lunch in a place today where there was geese honking in my ears. Not that I don't have an accent too, but I know mine's better than some. The whole Wizard of Oz notion of this is all just magical transformation, and we've transformed once, we can transform again, and replacement neighborhoods for replacement neighborhoods.
Now I gotta go home and watch The Wizard of Oz.
I want to add my take on that, and I think what really struck me was that thing about the memories are housed, and that's that's what I love about growing up in the Southside and here in Williamsburg. That my memories are the empty lot we would cut through on our way to go to Catholic school, because it wasn't overdeveloped. It was just a lot, like you just run through there just because you wanted to. It was fun. The place where I played in the pump, during the summers, right? The place where you would play wiffle ball in the street. The place where 4th of July, which is tomorrow, was I'm going to buy fireworks and just blow them up everywhere and just have so much fun. That's what it really stands out to me, that those memories and how it should be cherished and it should be built on, and that's what really makes a community vibrant, people's memories of it,
So we referenced The Wizard of Oz, but the film that we really should be talking about is Don't Be a Menace While Drinking Your Juice in the Hood by Wayans Brothers, right? Because that's really how I feel about Williamsburg and the way you've described.
Definitely. And that was a spoof of Don't Be a Menace. Menace to Society and
Boys in the Hood.
And Boys in the Hood, which actually was the first time I ever even heard Gentrification, when Furious is talking about it, about what was happening in South Central with selling the house. So,
see?
circle.
It's not a non sequitur.
Happy birthday, America.
Thank you for listening, ladies and gentlemen. That's all we have. Follow us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/bittersweetbrooklyn. I'm Dennis with Meredith signing off from Brooklyn. Peace.